coaching, from my perspective and in my experience, if you are not present in a coaching conversation, you will be a shitty coach, and it will come out. Like whatever your stuff is, that your hangups, your mental baggage, whatever it is, like if you want to impress somebody or you want to be valuable, all the things, they will show up in the conversation and they will get in the way and they will prevent you from doing a good job. And so it's, as far as I've found, the most powerful crucible for showing you the stuff that's preventing you from being present in each individual moment and giving you the opportunity to practice and let it go over and over. I think it's been immensely helpful for my own personal, psychological, spiritual development. And that's, I think, a big part of why I do it.
Ryan, welcome to Tech Scenes Unplugged. Thanks for joining me.
So glad to be here. Nice to see you.
So let's start from the top. Let's dig into it. So tell me about Inside Out.
Sure. Yeah. Inside Out is the executive coaching firm that I run now. It's a 4-person firm, 4 different founders, 4 different EO coaches, founder coaches. And it really stems from prior to my work as an executive coach. I was a CEO in venture tech startups for about 15 years. And I worked with a bunch of coaches, and I found it immensely hard to I found coaches who were either the been there, done that guy, right? Somebody who'd been through the ringer and could kind of help you see around corners and business design and stuff like that. And then I could find the psychologist who could help me sort of understand the way that my mind worked and work on mental patterns and stuff like that. And I went back and forth between these, different coaches, depending on what I was up to. And I was never able to find somebody who could hold both of those conversations, both been there, done that, as well as the inner game and the psychological aspect of it. So I have a degree in psychology and also a whole bunch of training in various executive coaching modalities, but also a 15-year career as an executive. And all of the founder coaches at Inside Out also have a similar background. They've all founded, funded, scaled, and sold their own companies. I think you actually worked with one of them in the past. And then they all are certified executive coaches with a variety of backgrounds, from neuro-linguistic programming to presence-based coaching to conscious leadership group and all sorts of stuff like that. So, any of the people on our team can hold both of those conversations, which as a founder and CEO, I think is a really important part of that journey.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for you, why coaching? Like, you could have done another startup. You could have maybe not just worked at all. Like, why coaching for you?
When I left my last company, VNN, it triggered an identity crisis of epic proportions. And I think, and I've seen this in some clients I work with as well, like there's a tendency to wrap your identity up with your company to the point where they become one and the same. And I certainly did that. If you'd asked me, like, what's the meaning of life? I would have said something like make VNN successful. I wouldn't have really thought much more about it.
Which is very common, right? It's very common.
Yeah, it is. I've learned that. And so when I left VNN, when I exited it, it gave me the opportunity, which occurred at the time as a crisis, to reevaluate that. And I began to see that I've been running my ass off my whole life, accomplishing this, that, and the other thing. And by that point, I had accomplished enough to get a sense that one more accomplishment wasn't really going to make that much of a difference. So even though I immediately had an instinct to start another startup because that's what I knew.
Yep.
I didn't buy that was actually what I wanted, even though it felt that way at the time. And I remember telling my wife about it. I was like, I don't believe that I can catch anything that's worthwhile, but I'm still running my ass off. So I'm going to take a break, and whatever it is I'm running from, I'm going to let it catch up and see what happens. And so I did that. And there's a whole period of time, like an 18-month sabbatical, where I stayed at a monastery and reintroduced myself to psychedelics. And I've always been not always, but for the last 15 years, I've been a big meditator. So I got a chance to dive really deeply into that. Studied with a Zen master. All of these things, it was the alternative to jumping back in and recreating my identity, was let the identity completely crumble, let it all go away, and see what's left. And what was left over time, well, what was left was just me. It was just Ryan. And that was really uncomfortable at first because I had always been Ryan, the guy who's building this, or Ryan, the guy who's building that. And being just Ryan, especially when everybody, you exit your company, everybody's like, "What's next, man? What are you doing? What are you building?"
Right.
And we just had to get some reps answering that with like, I don't know, I'm experimenting. I'm just here now. But eventually, I got practiced at that, and I got, as I was sort of reorienting to what was next, rather than architecting it all, which is how I would have approached it previously. I was pretty intentional about just getting quiet and trying to listen for what life wanted me, what life wanted from me. And what it wanted from me is I got this signal that what it wanted me to do was write. Didn't go into any more detail than that. Just like, it's time to write. Made sense because I have a creative writing degree in addition to a psychology degree. So writing was always a passion for me that I put on the table while I was building companies. So I started writing. Writing led to people, founders all over the world reaching out to me, and those conversations led to. And at some point, I was like, I'm coaching these people. I should probably figure this out and take it seriously. So I looked into some of these coaching programs, and I was like, shit, these are expensive coaching programs. I don't know if I want to do this. So if I'm supposed to, go down this path, then the universe is just going to have to make it free. I don't know how that's going to happen, but that's what's going to have to happen. And then a sequence of events happened, and I got a call from one of the firms that I had reached out to, the one that I was most excited about, NLP Marin, which is where I ended up studying first. And they were like, yeah, we want you to take this course, and we want to offer it to you gratis. And I was like, fuck, okay, well,
you asked for it.
Yeah. And so this process, the coaching, and then also large inside out as an organization, has different from any other organization I've built. Other organizations have always been vision first, and then I'm building toward the vision. This is a very emergent process. It's very much, settling, letting go of what we want the future to be, settling into the present and looking at what's here and what does it mean for us to do the best work that we can given what's here, and let the future sort of handle itself. That's led to a whole bunch of cool stuff.
That's interesting. One of the things you and I have talked about before, you had mentioned that you feel coaching, it's making you the person you want to be, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
And what's that mean?
Yeah.
What's that mean?
When part of the process of decoupling from my company, it took a while. The last company, the one I was at for about 10 years. And that was a venture startup called VNN. It was like, we thought of it like ESPN.com for high schools.
Okay.
And I remember vividly when my first son was born. It was probably 8 years into that journey or so. And I'm sitting in the hospital, and it's it's it, right? It's the birth and everything, and it's he's born. And I remember the narrative in my head being like, well, this is like top 10 moments or one of the top moments in my life. I feel like maybe I should feel this really intensely. And it was really an intellectual thought. Like, I should feel this really intensely. And then, followed quickly by, I was raising money, and I had some investor stuff that I had to do. And I look back on that time, and I'm sad about it as I look back on it, because it feels like an opportunity wasted, but it also kind of was a hell of a mirror to hold up in terms of how I was living life at the time. Cranked down my emotions pretty dramatically to be successful. I had, sacrificed, every moment in pursuit of whatever the next moment was, including a really fucking big moment. And so as I think about like the time that I spent, the decades that I spent sort of living that way, what's become most important to me is presence in each moment, independent of what it is. And so I've taken pains and steps to architect my life around being able to be as present as I can in each moment. Coaching, from my perspective and in my experience, if you are not present in a coaching conversation, you will be a shitty coach. And it will come out. Like, whatever your stuff is, that your hangups, your mental baggage, whatever it is, like if you want to impress somebody or you want to be valuable, all the things, they will show up in the conversation and they will get in the way and they will prevent you from doing a good job. And so it's, as far as I've found, the most powerful crucible for showing you the stuff that's preventing you from being present in each individual moment and giving you the opportunity to practice and let it go over and over and over again. So I think it's been immensely helpful for my own personal, psychological, spiritual development. And that's, I think, a big part of why I do it.
You must be a big Eckhart Tolle fan. You read,
Yeah, I mean, I came
you
to
obviously
him
read a
late,
lot of
actually.
books behind you.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think The Power of Now talks a lot about that. And I find that
Yeah.
too within our coaching is different. We have kind of
Hmm.
different types of coaching practices, but when I'm with a leadership team and I'm facilitating 100%, 110% present.
Yeah.
And I feel it as I'm going to the session. I feel that like presence coming, and it's just, and it makes a long day, especially for the people in the sessions too. I think it's the
I
hard
bet.
work. I think it's the hard work. Like people are like, oh, I can't be in meetings that long. And it's really about how long can you be present? And I
Hmm.
think that's really hard for people. I tell founders and teams all the time, like the hard work isn't staying up late at night working on a presentation. That's not the hard work. The hard work is being present in conversations that you have.
Mm.
And those could be conversations where you're like coming up with great ideas and things that you're going to do, or they could be those challenging conversations that you're having with maybe employees that are something's not happening and something's not working, or
Yeah.
you're both hiding something because you don't want to have the conversation because you think it might end something, maybe the relationship. I think that's the hard work. I think through meditation, I found the more you meditate, the more you can actually start to be more present and be good at being more present.
Yeah. I mean, me too. I feel like meditation has been a big part of my journey, and so have a lot of other tools. I think coaching plays a role. Psychedelics have played a role. Um, a number of different things. And I don't know, my experience is that there's like a kind of a dancey flow to various practices and various things that I've become more comfortable allowing myself to follow. And it's just like, oh, right now it feels like this is the area that I should be exploring. That feels like it's helping me to let go of those little clenchy moments,
Right. Yeah.
Um, and over time, I was talking with one of my teachers, and we were talking about mental, sort of the inner monologue that exists, and I was reflecting, like, most of the time I don't have an inner monologue.
Mm.
Sometimes it pops up, most of the time not, and that's like really different from how it once was. And I think that's one way, the way that I think about, like, sort of charting the evolution of what it means to be present.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Yeah, I can see that. The more anxiety you have, you probably have more conversations, I think,
Have
in
you
your
have
head.
you seen is Inside Out 2, the movie that came out recently?
No, I
There's
saw the
a
first one.
there's a it's a good movie. It's actually, I think, a really, really good overview and almost like a course in internal family systems, which is one of the
Mm.
modalities that we end up using with clients. It's a really powerful modality. But there's this one part that, so internal family systems effectively is breaks, it's all of the different sub personalities, each with their own goals and how to work with them, is effectively what it comes down to. And in that movie, there is an anxious part that is just buzzing all over the place, trying to control everything, is scared shitless that she's going to miss something, and so is coming up with all the plans and all to try to solve for all those things. And we were talking before the session around, like, my journey with anxiety, with not only like meditation and mindfulness and some of the tools that we've talked about, but also things as practical as like your gut biome, probiotics, and
Hmm.
your magnesium intake. It's like magnesium, B6, and B12 have an enormous impact on these things as well. So as this become a priority to me, I've started to kind of look into all of these different areas around how to practice letting go of all of that control and planning, and just trust that, trust in the universe that things are going to work out the way they need to, but also trust in myself that I don't need to plan all this stuff. I can show up in a moment and do a good job just by
Right.
being here,
Right. Right. So this is interesting. So what you do now as a coach,
Yeah.
I'm curious when you talk to other CEO founders, and I'm guessing that the majority of people you're working with are CEO founders, venture-backed companies,
Yep.
similar to what you had. I help those teams to become present in the now, to look back at like what's working, what's not working, and have conversations about it. And then have conversations about where we have issues or opportunities, being present, but then being present about where we're going in the future. And we, define that 3-year vision or 1-year plan, OKRs, things like that. All along the whole time we're being present, but we're looking back and we're looking forward and we're looking now, which is almost different than what you are saying in some elements as well, right? Like
In some
as
ways,
a
yeah.
CEO founder, can they do what you're doing now? Just be present in the moment all the time? Or is there a time in which they do need to do some of the things that I'm talking about?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think that there is a way of planning and being so immersed with the planning as you probably are, that like the distinction between you and your abstract mind doing all of its things and this activity that you're doing dissolves, and it's just one thing. It's just you. I have found my flow with this planning process. I've merged with this process. So you might be, the content might be future oriented or past oriented if it's a retrospective, but the actual activity takes place in this particular moment. And there's not, our minds have a lovely adaptive ability to represent things abstractly, right? So language is the best example of an abstract representation of a thing. We just made up some words and letters and stuff to represent these things, right? And if I'm having a conversation with you and I'm thinking the whole time, Jeff, like this is Jeff, and I'm thinking, and that's the thing that's in my mind. That's a very different experience from being with you and from seeing you actually as you are. And I think the same thing applies with, if I'm thinking about, okay, we're planning right now, and here's the structure, and what's going to go next in the structure, how's the next one going? And if I'm doing all that, I'm not present while I'm planning. But if I can allow myself to sink in and really be here, and takes a certain amount of like letting go of control, letting go of that part that wants to just manage everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you can allow yourself to if you can trust yourself to be in that space and to jam on your instrument instead of like really thinking hard about all the notes you got to play.
Right.
I think that's how a CEO can navigate any part of the role in that way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thinking about VNN, tell me a little bit about it. Changing gears here. I'm curious, sure. What was the founding story and what did you guys build?
So and I want to come back to the coaching stuff, because as coaches, I have questions for you about this too, and I actually have a theory. So the founding story for VNN, well, the way that I mean, it became really practiced. Like, and anybody that's in the venture world, you get used to like the founding story. You're going to be good at telling it, because it's an important part of raising money and all that. So the story that I would tell is when I was a kid. I played every sport with a ball, everything. I was an only child, single mom, and did all these things. And amidst all of that, my mom never missed a game. Made it to literally every game throughout that entire thing. And she was running a nonprofit at the time, so I didn't really understand what that meant at the time. But like now, it's like, shit, that's a big thing. I struggle to do that now with my kids. I am doing it, but it's hard.
Right.
And staying out late at night in the driveway, shooting hoops. And that was like for us a big deal. And a way that we sort of bonded. Basketball is my big love. And then the pinnacle of my high school athletic career was senior year varsity basketball. We won the district championship. And I remember final buzzer sounds. We're at the away at Granville, and we're so stoked. We weren't supposed to win. And the entire crowd rushes the court. Or our section of the crowd rushes the court. And in the middle of that rush, I see my mom, this little 5'2", 100-pound soaking wet lady, just like chugging towards me. Right, she jumps up and she like gives me a big hug, and it was a culmination of an awful lot of stuff for us as a family. Anyway, next day, go to the mailbox to see what the newspaper wrote about the biggest game in history, and as luck would have it, on the front page of the sports paper is big ass picture of me hugging my mom on the basketball court.
Oh, amazing.
As a 17-year-old kid that has to go to the locker room, like not as amazing, but But for my mom, huge deal. And so she laminates it, frames it, puts it on a table in the living room, and it's still there. And every day, every time I go back to her house, we walk by that table and we're right there and thinking about everything the basketball meant to us. And as I got out of high school and college and got into the professional world and got into entrepreneurship, the high school sports world changed. And as media changed, local newspapers played less of a role and media was changing all the ways that it was. Those types of memories were no longer available, mostly for athletes. There was no, journalists covering games anymore. There was none of that stuff. Some, parents would take some photos, but it wasn't the same, and so we created VNN as a tool set to enable those types of high school sports memories, like the one that I had with my mom, to happen and sort of promulgate throughout all the different high school sports communities at scale across the country. And over the 10 years we were doing it, we got from 0 schools all the way up to, I think by the time I left, we were at like 47% of the country.
Wow.
So it was a hell of a journey. And I told that story about my mom in the process of raising capital and a whole bunch of times. And it's interesting to revisit it now because it's probably the first time I've said it in 5, 6, 7 years.
Going through that process, I mean, I've founded a few companies and it's such a journey. You remember so many elements of it. As a coach now working with people doing the same thing, what's the one thing that you reflect on probably the most that you feel like you helped them with from your experience?
So I have a theory, and I'm interested. I'm going to ask you too. I'll tell you my perspective, and I'm curious if it's the same for you. My theory is that maybe not all coaches, but a lot of coaches, you can focus your coaching on any part of the entrepreneur journey. There's lots, right? From the very first stages all the way to the end. All the way, I mean, even past the end, even into like, the transition afterwards. My theory is that most coaches focus their efforts and focus their coaching on the parts that were the hardest for them. And I don't, I'm curious what you say, but for me, that's absolutely true. There are sort of 2 areas in my experience as a founder CEO that were so hard they left an enormous impact on me. And whether that's a combination of I just did them badly or like they were so hard and it was challenging. The first of those is we went from 15 to 75 people in like 9 months during a growth period, and the whole company broke. Everybody hated each other. Everybody's resentful. It just sucked. Everybody's, effectively angry at me because I'm the one that's supposed to have prevented this from happening. And I had just written an article prior to that was titled "Don't Fuck Up the Culture." Yeah, And I had a mentor of mine. He was the founder of the North Face, a guy named Hap Klopp that was on my board at the time. And he was working with me. He identified, he thought was the issue I was completely blind to, and effectively took me through a company operating system implementation without there was no sort of structure, like peak teams or something like that, but it was just his experience. And it saved the company. It took us from a big friggin' mess of emotions into a high performing team, and you can almost like chart the growth of the company from like it's like this, and then okay, and this whole area was we grew too fast and everything sucks, and then we figured we installed a system and then that worked out. So it wasn't just the system, but the process of early scale and going from post product market fit into like we're developing systems and I'm dealing with teams of teams. I'm dealing at the level of influence as opposed to control for the first time. That area was really challenging for me, and it took me a while to figure it out. So a good chunk of what I do takes place at that area. And then the other aspect I talked about earlier was post exit.
Right.
And the identity shit that goes on there. You think it's going to be puppies and sunshine and rainbows and trumpets and stuff, and it's not. It's a doozy. And it can feel really lonely too, particularly if you've had a really good exit, because you're supposed to be friggin' happy. You can't talk to anybody about how you feel because everybody's gonna be like, aren't you happy with all the money that you just got? What the hell's wrong with you? So I mean, it can be a really challenging time, and that was really hard for me too. And so I do a lot of work with founders who have conquered the, sort of the initial thrust of their career. They become successful, whatever that means, in a functional, like I built a thing way.
Right.
And now they want to reorient to something that feels a little bit more expressive, as opposed to just like redoing another company at a bigger scale. And I help people make
Mm-hmm.
that transition too. And again, the two areas that were the most challenging for me is where I find I do most of my work. So is that true for you?
So restate the question for me.
Yeah. Why do you focus at the area that you focus from a coaching perspective? And does it have anything to do with your journey as a founder?
I think that's really interesting. I think you definitely are probably onto something with this. Mine goes back almost a little bit before me and being an entrepreneur. Is I was raised by entrepreneurs. I had entrepreneurs on both sides of my family. My parents, my uncles on both sides, very entrepreneurial family. Actually, my family on my mom's side came over from Macedonia, and they had shoe stores for like 3 or 4 generations, and came over with that. And so I got to grow up in an entrepreneurial household, and then all my parents' friends were also entrepreneurs, and it's very similar to me now. And so I got to see people grinding, being successful, not being successful, the challenges and pains of what they were going through. And I just had empathy for that, like from the beginning for me. And so as I got into college, and I always knew I'd start a business, I studied entrepreneurship. I got a finance degree because I thought, what if I need a job? I need a backup degree, right? And as I got in, I started 3 companies in college. One actually turned into a real company, and it grew very, very quickly. And I sold it when I left college to my partner that I co-founded the business with,
That's
because
so cool.
it was the dot-com boom, and I wanted to get into tech because I was still just had this appetite to learn, and I wanted to learn from people moving very quickly. I jumped into
Yeah.
that, and I was like, wow, this is unlike anything I learned in school, unlike anything that I did in my last business. And it felt like I was drinking from the fire hose of like knowledge. And what I learned really quickly is these companies are moving so fast. There's no controls and there's no structure. And it was about burning money very quickly and trying to just sell as fast as possible and build as fast as possible. And the success rate was very small. And I got connected to a couple of the CEO founders that I worked with very quickly, and I had that same empathy for them. I was like, my job, I was a chief of staff at one of them. My job was basically to make him successful. And he joked about that. That was our joke. It's like, your job's make me successful, which I knew what he meant. It was to make the company successful, but I really zoned in on like, what does he need and what's missing here? And man, this is impossible. Although growing up entrepreneurially in my family and friends of friends, they're all businesses that you could replicate. Like if you were going to start like a electrical company, or, you're an
Yep.
electrician, or,
Yep.
dental offices, like there were other dental offices you could replicate. There were other plumbing companies or electrical companies or shoe stores. You could replicate success. In venture-backed companies, they're doing things that have never been done before. So you cannot replicate business models. That fascinated me and also scared me. And so that's why I really zoned into like, how do you create a business model that is a learning loop and a communication loop for the organization as you're growing really quickly? And that's what Peak became. Is I understood that you need an operating system for
Yeah.
companies like that. So that's where
Yeah.
my journey came from. And that's
There's
why
a
I'm passionate about it, because I just feel like being a CEO founder and everybody else on the team is some of the most hardest work that you can possibly do.
Are you open to a reflection? Yeah. As I was listening to you, there's two things that kind of showed up for me. One of them was there's a strong thread of like the way that you talk about your journey is sort of anchored around learning.
Yes.
And like each of the decisions that you're making, it feels like it's like you're gravitating toward some opportunity that you have to like learn something new, or
100%.
discover something or whatever. That's yeah, that you talk about it sounds like that. And you saw the impact of that early on, in a much better way than I did, because it sounds like you learned some hard lessons around entrepreneurship without having to actually do them, just by watching your parents and watching other people around them. So much
Right.
better than actually doing them like I did. But it's, and then what I'm wondering is, with this big focus on learning and sort of the way that it sounds like you approach parts of your life, to end up in the position where you are as like a teacher and a coach, right? Is a really interesting way to position yourself given everything that you've been through. I think that's really cool.
Right. Yeah. Learning is so important. And I tell a lot of people that, one, if you have a growing organization, you need a learning organization. If your people aren't willing to learn, then you have to get different people, because the only way to grow is to learn, right? And so in those organizations, things are going to change a lot, right? So you have to be used to change, which means you have to be open to learn. If you're not open to learning, you're not open to changing, right? So then it gets complex as you're growing very quickly and you're doing something that's never been done before. Everybody's learning, and you have to capture that and come back and talk about it so you can double down. I mean, if you think about capital in venture, right? Capital comes from LPs, people that have money that want to invest money, goes into funds. So they're making bets on these funds. Then the funds are making bets on these founders with the capital. And then as a CEO founder, now you're making bets on within the organization, where do I want to put this money? And you're hoping those bets, when you put $1 in, it turns into $2 or $3 or $4 or $5.
With as little moving pieces as possible.
100%. And so as the money cycles into organizations, it's all about like developing focus and learning what works. Learning, like we're all trying to seek what works. And if it works, then we'll put $2 on it to make $6, or we'll put 5 on it to make 500, right? Like, so it is a learning cycle. Part of the reason why I do like OKRs with teams every 90 days is because that learning cycle's fast in the early stage and growth stage. If you look at really big organizations, how they do their planning is like just yearly, right? And then they just work the plan because they're not learning as much, right? So you need a faster cycle of learning. That's why we have a weekly meeting where we're looking at things, are they on or off, and then iterating and doing triage to solve them. So yeah, to me, learning's so important, so important.
Well, and so you've created an organization and a practice around teaching groups how to learn.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's pretty damn cool. And you can see sort of like the thread of where that might come from, given how you've sort of, gotten to where you are.
What's interesting too, because I look at it and seeing like from you, like being in it and then now coaching it, myself being in it, also coaching it. I've studied jujitsu for about 14 years. When I first started and I was a white belt, I was just learning from everybody. And then now today, being a black belt and still working with, newer people, and also, training with world champions that are way beyond me, we're all learning and coaching at the same time, right? So it's like you're still learning, but you're always sharing stuff. And everything I'm sharing, like on the mat, is similar to everything that I'm sharing, like with these teams, is things that I've learned from other people, right? So it's this cycle. It also reminds me, I've had a lot of conversations with friends I grew up skateboarding. That was the same way. It's like, wow, someone does a really cool trick and they're like, show me how to do it. You know what I mean? Or you do something and they're like, show me how to do it. It's that collaborative, like coaching and learning environment that I really appreciate and thrive in.
I can tell. Yeah. And it feels like it's a gift that you have to give to all the different people that end up working with you.
Right.
And so, it just happens to be targeted towards one of the areas that I can personally attest is painful as hell if you don't do it.
So I have a question for you. You've written about this, and I'm curious your framework on this. One of the things that you said is like part of being a coach is to help people, was it love, know, and trust themselves? How do you do that? That sounds very difficult.
It's interesting. I have a part of me that when I was, sort of thinking about the framing of that, right? Because it's a concept that can be explained in any number of different ways, but that's like the shortest way of explaining it. I had a story going on in my head that like, oh, people will think that loving themselves, knowing themselves, and trusting themselves is table stakes, like everybody does that. And my experience is no, not at all. There's a pretty common, I think, orientation to entrepreneurship as a whole is somebody who deep down doesn't like themselves, doesn't trust themselves. They kind of thinks that there's some version of worthless, and is using business as a means of buttressing themselves to prove to, somebody in particular, or the world in general, or themselves, that they're not a piece of shit. And that's, I mean, I know that one, that was me. So I can speak with some experience on that. And one of the challenges with that is that when your business is the foundation of your self-worth, any sort of threat to the business is like a mortal threat to you. And when you're threatened in that way, that can lead to all sorts of wacky behaviors and can be really unhelpful for the dynamics of an organization from a sheerly practical perspective, not to mention like how it feels. So when I think about like the path of leadership and the type of work that we do at Inside Out and the type of work that I'm really passionate about, it's ultimately like a recognition or an inquiry process to get clear on what it is that's driving you, what is that aspect that's causing all of you to make the decisions that you make. And it oftentimes starts with the idea that, well, that's just me, I'm making them up. But that's not true. You spend, you're a meditator, you spend any amount of time, you start to realize the big Rube Goldberg machine that your brain is, right? And you start to see the causes and effects. And the normal reaction when you see that nuclear reactor core of dissatisfaction inside you is to run from it, which is why we run so much when we're building startups, right? We're running from this sense. And so if the intention is to first to get to know yourself, that's this inquiry process to figure out what are the parts of me that are causing my behaviors when I'm not present. Where do they come from? Where did I inherit them? And by learning about them,
triggers. Would you consider those like triggers?
Trigger is a part of a sequence.
Okay.
Oftentimes there's an emotional learning sometime when you're young that gets stored, and then a variety of protection mechanisms built on top of it. So I might have learned I'm worthless. Maybe my dad said something for him completely offhand,
right.
But for me it really landed in the wrong way, right? And I internalized that. Well, I never want to feel that again. And so I develop a bunch of protection mechanisms against feeling worthless, right? And one of them is I'm going to be a fucking amazing achiever. I'm going to, become super successful at all these things. Now, where a trigger comes in is when, you have a failure in your business. And all of a sudden, it's not I'm interpreting the failure as what it is. It hits all the way down to this initial emotional learning that I had when I was 4, causes all of these protection things to flare up, and it sort of hits me right in my sweet spot. So triggers are one way that the world can teach us about how our system is wired. One of the ways that we can learn, but ultimately the process of learning to love those parts, even if they're inconvenient, is a whole separate effort. It's you learn those things, and we use a variety of modalities like internal family systems or neurolinguistic programming or things like this to when you have identified a part of yourself that is unhelpful in some respect, the natural reaction is to push against it and try to get rid of it. And that creates internal tension inside your system and just lodges that part in there.
Right.
So it takes some practice, and it takes some presencing work to sort of distance your sense of identity from the part. But when you do that and you really inquire into, what's this part trying to do for me? How's it trying to help? What you learn is that all the parts that you have, even the ones that are the biggest pains in your ass, are actually trying to help in their own way. They actually have a good intention. And if you can appreciate those parts for their good intentions and really see them in that way, then they start to dissolve. They start to be a little softer. And you can start to gain a little bit of freedom from those. And ultimately, work on all these parts, identify them, unlearn them through this process, through learning to love parts of yourself, and eventually, in a Miyagi sort of way, your whole self. Once you get clear enough, you start to get a sense of, you start to develop a more accessible relationship with your intuition, with that little quiet voice inside of you that has a sense of where you ought to go, which, for most founders, when they start, there's just so much noise all the time that there's no space for this. And it's a quiet voice. You don't hear it. When you can quiet down enough, and that takes some practice and some doing, your intuition, your subconscious processes, I think according to the latest studies, processes like 26,000 times as much data as your conscious mind. And mostly we just think with our conscious mind, but through our intuition, we gain access to the vastly more powerful parts of our processing power, parts of our interpretation of the world. And over time, through a set of experiments, learn to trust those parts of ourselves, learn to trust our intuition, even if we can't explain it. Learn to trust that, like, no, I know this sense that I have, I'm going to follow it, even if I can't explain why, and I know it's going to turn out good because it has so many times in the past. So
Right.
that's kind of the process.
I think it's so powerful. And that is very similar to what I see at a bigger piece in an organization. So what you're talking about
Really?
is I think pain is opportunity. And I think it's important
Mm.
that people learn
Says the
that.
jujitsu guy.
Yeah. I mean, it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Jujitsu actually stands for gentle art, by the way. You
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
gently choke to the person if you do it
Is it
the
meant?
right way.
Is it?
Not at all. It's all about using other people's energy and its angles, and we could get real deep
Really
into
cool.
that.
Whole nother topic. I won't be able to keep up
Yeah.
with you, but thank you.
No, I think you would actually. So pain is opportunity. And this is
Yeah.
like what you're talking about is when something happens externally and it hits you internally, and it's hitting you internally because maybe some stored emotion or energy you had from
Mhm.
a different event. But the opportunity is that to reflect on what is that and why is that there and why do I believe that's real? It's an opportunity for yourself to one, first identify it, but then acknowledge it's there and then have the opportunity to let it go or do something about it if need be. Oftentimes letting it go can start to help solve the problem. But it's the same thing in an organization that I see with the organizations and the teams that I work with is that when a challenge comes up or an issue comes up, it's the biggest opportunity for you. And especially in
Mhm.
teams that are doing things that have never been done before, right? Because your opportunity to solve problems and issues and challenges allows you to move forward. If there's another company trying to do what you're doing as well, trying to, create this market or create a
Mhm.
similar product, if you can solve these issues and problems that you're having, they're going to have the same issues and problems,
Mhm.
right? So it is such an opportunity that you can identify these and solve them. And what a lot of teams do, if they don't have an operating system, is that they don't even know that they have these problems because they don't have a mechanism to identify these problems. Or they have the problems, maybe the problems in sales, but there's not a forum or opportunity for that head of sales to have that conversation with the team.
Yeah.
Or it's easy for them to say like, that's my problem, I'm going to figure it out. When I have teams doing weekly meetings or even when we're in sessions, annual and quarterly, so many times I'll see like an engineering problem solved by the CFO or a product issue solved by someone else. Maybe it's, marketing, but their brains and working together and having a team that's a unique set of like skills and experiences, all different, solving problems together is magic. And oftentimes people think they're just bad at their job or it's not clear about who's doing what. But once you can bring together a team and bring up what's working and what's not working and solve the what's not working, which is typically, okay, you're building capabilities in the organization by identifying the issues, talking about them, solving them. So I see that very macro of what you're talking about on a human level, micro. Pain is opportunity.
And I think it's also a signal of, in some cases, pain becomes a signal of you being on the right path towards exercising that opportunity. Like I think about, I end up, in your work, I'm making an assumption based on my experience, just having gone through it as a CEO myself, is like when you're trying to align a whole bunch of people to a vision or a set of OKRs or whatever, what you run into is resistance, especially the first time you do it. You run into resistance all over the organization, and each time each time you run into that resistance, one instinct is like, well, it sucks. Like stop resisting. Like, come on, But really, this resistance is an identifier that there's a misalignment right here. And if we can get this aligned, now we've eliminated some drag from our organization, and we can work faster. So every time that you run into a disagreement, and during this process that you do, especially vehement disagreements, it's like, hell yeah, okay, this is going to be hard, but also there's enormous upside to this process. So, I mean, again, to your point, this pain plays as well as if I'm trying to become a more direct communicator, it's the same sort of thing. Like pain is an indicator of where the work is.
Right. I find mapping it backwards from the biggest, mission going back to like a 3-year
Mhm.
vision back to a 1-year plan to the 90 days. If you just start in the 90 days, you're isolating in a vacuum and you're going to have a lot of challenges and issues. Not choose the right things, but if you reverse engineer it from the mission all the way back down at those like 5 different focal points, it really helps kind of identify where it's stuck and to have those conversations. Now, as you grow and evolve, you are going to probably have some people that don't align anymore or
Mhm.
are not the right people anymore. So there are going to be changes as you go. Every peak that you reach, you're going to have a different visibility on and
Yeah.
move that map.
Yeah, my sense of and this was hard one, I suppose, but my sense of the purpose of a good culture is on the one hand to empower the right people to do amazing work. And that
Yep.
is holistic in all the different ways, right? And the other goal, equally important, is to make it so uncomfortable for the wrong people that they leave. Um, and that latter part is pokey, and sometimes is depending on especially for those people who are conflict avoidant, is like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like you gain, if your goal is to move fast as an organization, you can gain even more from losing one of the wrong people, whether that's because they're not aligned or any other reason, than you can from adding somebody that's one of the right people. So it's a both and, as you think about
Mm-hmm.
this sort of a process,
Yep.
whether you're operating at the systems level or, as I so often do, operating with the CEO and how the CEO is showing up amidst all of the people within their organization.
So true. All right. I have one last question for you.
Oh man,
Before I do,
there's a lot of build up to this question. Okay.
yeah. So I have one last question for you. It's
Okay.
probably one of the most important questions you ever been asked in your life.
Oh
You've
man,
done like so far, you've done really well, all these other questions, but this one is going to be challenging.
this
So
one's
I'm
gonna
glad you're
stump
sitting
me.
down. Yeah.
Okay,
So
thank you.
here's the scenario. You are trapped on a desert island the rest of your life. It's a nice desert island. It's a tropical desert island. You have plenty of food and water and shelter. So the things that you need, you have them. One of the things that you don't have is entertainment. You have no entertainment. However, an old 80s boombox drifted ashore with unlimited batteries for the rest of your life. However, you only get to choose one album of any genre for the rest of your life. What album is that going to be?
Genesis, we can't dance.
No
No
hesitation.
question. Uh-uh.
There's no, okay, why was there no hesitation?
I am a not even a closet. I am a loud, vocal, extreme Phil Collins fan.
Wow.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Goes back a long time. Blasting cars or blasting those songs from that particular album in my mom's car as we're driving down the street as a little kid. And I've stayed in love with Phil Collins music since then. And the first album ever was "We Can't Dance" by Genesis. I mean, I don't even think I can sing every single song, pretty readily. So, and I still get no ends of when we'll go. My wife and I, my wife's gotten used to it, but we'll go into any store, department store, or whatever. And Phil has unfortunately gotten to like Muzak, so it just kind of shows up sometimes. But I'll be in the middle of a conversation. I'll be like, wait, and it's like, yep, there he is. There he is. I can pick it up.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Yeah,
What about you?
Phil's in the grocery store a lot. I noticed that before.
Yep. And it makes
Yeah.
it makes for a way better shopping experience, doesn't it?
Oh, for sure.
And now you've asked this question enough times, you've probably answered it before, but I've never heard it. What's your answer?
Mine changes all the time. I love music. So like
Okay.
mine changes all the time. Right now it'd probably be Bob Marley, something within Bob Marley's collection. I've been listening a lot to like Damon Marley lately and those
Oh,
compilations. So yeah,
I
I
haven't
think
heard
I'd
any
go.
Damon Marley, but
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of great family members that have a lot of great music. So
oh, that's
yeah,
cool. Did you
so
see the movie that came out about him recently?
I did.
I didn't
Yeah,
see it. Is it good?
it is good. There's elements of his life I didn't really know or how dramatic different elements of his life were. So I'm guessing that was pretty accurate.
Yeah,
That movie, but yeah, it was pretty good. I caught it on a plane coming back from a client not too long ago.
makes sense. Makes sense. I
Yeah.
love it.
All right, Ryan. Well, thanks for joining me on Tech Scenes Unplugged. It
Yeah,
was
thank
great
you for
having
having
you.
me. This was fun.